Well, hi, everybody. This is John Sarver. It's Thursday evening, and we have another clean energy, renewable energy Zoom. And thank you all for coming on this very nice night. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, Eagle, Homeland Solar, Harvest Solar, Shree Energy, and Sumter Solar. And most of you are probably members, but if you're not, we would love to have you kind of join GLREA, which you can do online at our website, glrea.org. And tonight is going to have an interesting discussion because planning and zoning for solar and wind farms is obviously a big deal these days. And Madeleine Krol has joined us. She's a clean energy land use specialist with the Center for Empowering Communities at the Graham Sustainability Institute, see if I can get all this correct, at the University of Michigan. That part is easy. And, the center helps communities with all the issues related to planning and zoning for the utility scale solar, wind, and storage. And with that, I'll please mute yourself. Should have plenty of time later for Q&A. And with that, let me pass it on to Madeleine.
Super. Thank you so much, John. And hello, everyone. There are some familiar names in the crowd, which is exciting. Thank you so much, John, for the opportunity to speak. I've not joined one of these before live, but I've watched a couple of the recorded videos online. I'm Madeleine. I work at the University of Michigan Center for Empowering Communities. Very long job title, so I'm not going to repeat it. But I've been with U of M for almost 3 years now. I have a background in planning. I went to planning school over in Germany, where I grew up for the first 30 years of my life, and now call Michigan my home. Before I joined U of M, I've worked at the local government level in Germany on kind of sustainability initiatives and energy. So this is kind of how I got into energy in the first place. I'm going to start sharing my screen now, if I can elegantly do this. Let's see. You should be seeing my screen now, and hopefully that works. Okay, great. I don't have air traffic control like I usually have in my office because I'm working from home tonight. But if there are questions and I don't see them in the chat, feel free to interrupt me too. If there's something that you're like, oh, I want to ask this question now and not wait till the end, feel free to just chime in. All right. I know that a year and a half ago, my colleague Sarah Mills has spoken to the same group on kind of overall what the Center for Empowering Communities does. And so today I want to give a quick reminder, but then spend most of the time kind of on planning and zoning, because that's kind of my daily bread and butter for utility scale renewables. And so we are a team, small but mighty, of four ladies that are working kind of with communities across the urban-rural spectrum as they leverage decarbonization opportunities to advance their goals and enhance their quality of life. That's the wordy motto, but the idea is that a lot of our work is directly with local governments and providing technical assistance. And so my colleague, Sarah Lee, she is working with lots of the leading cities and municipalities in Michigan on sustainability and climate action at large. And then the rural team, so to speak, of Sarah Mills, myself, and my colleague Olivia Stutzer are more the rural-oriented part of the group. And so, as you can maybe deduct from the motto, our usual target audience is local government officials, so township officials, planning commission members, folks who work for their communities in this space. And together, we kind of cover 4 broad topical areas, one of which being planning and zoning that I'm going to then talk on a bit more. But just for kind of framing and all the things that we do is my colleague Sarah Lee is leading the Catalyst Communities Partnership together with the State Energy Office in Eagle, which originated kind of as a let's have local governments come together and divide and conquer on their sustainability initiatives. what are others doing, what works well elsewhere, what could be a great template, and where do we not need to reinvent the wheel, but can learn from each other. Now that has really translated into this, 5 years later, into this Catalyst Leadership Circle, of which some of you may have heard of before, which is this really great networking group of communities and municipal staff that are helping each other out, and providing technical assistance to each other too. This now has also, what I think is a really exciting part of this, of this program, is that it connects students with municipalities across Michigan. So there's a graduate program, summer fellowship, which is now in the 4th year, which is fantastic as it connects grad students across all Michigan, not specific to U of M, with communities, and helps them work on sustainability initiatives. And then the Sustainable Towns class, it's not a project, it's a class, for undergrad students, also connecting them with communities that are at the beginning of their sustainable journey. I see a question on the chat. What is that? What is an MGC community? Great question. MGC is the Michigan Green, go back. The Michigan Green Communities, there's a lot on the slide that I didn't mention, I apologize. Michigan Green Communities is a Catalyst Communities program, which is basically a benchmarking program where communities can get certified based on kind of the sustainability actions they're already taken. And so communities can get certified, and if you are a silver or gold certified community in the Michigan Green Communities program, then you are receiving that extra additional technical assistance through Sarah, through the Catalyst Leadership Circle. So it's the top level of MGC communities that are then able to tap into the Catalyst Leadership Circle technical assistance. Great question, thank you. A second bullet of what we're doing is, since we're at a university, we also do a little bit of research, but really with a focus on engaged research. So just to cite highlight a couple of the things that predominantly Sarah Mills, my colleague, has been working on, is really understanding community impacts or impacts on communities of large-scale renewable energy development. And most, or notably, one paper really studying kind of attitudes towards wind development in Michigan, and how that can be tied to how people feel about the place that they live in, whether a community is maybe more amenity-driven or more of a productive view on where they live. And that translates to attitudes towards renewable energy development. So this is the Farmers versus Lakers paper here at the top. A project that came to a close last year is the Community-Centered Solar Development Program, which was a big project where a team of folks at U of M, MSU, and the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, LBNL, surveyed solar neighbors across the country for attitudes towards solar that they live next to, where the survey results are really interesting. And I'm going to also share, I forgot to say that at the beginning, the slides with everyone, so you can click on links. And so either maybe John perhaps can send this out to all registrants, or you can just email me. My email is at the end of the slide deck too, so that you can check out all of these things. A third maybe highlight, all of this is cool stuff, but the CCSD 2.0 is the Community-Centered Solar 2.0. It's a DOE funding program where I'm currently trying to understand land ownership trends. Like, who are the folks that are having solar on their property? Are they absentee landowners? Are they private landowners? Are there energy companies? And kind of understanding those ratios and how far they compare among other properties in the counties, in a couple of counties in the state. So this is an ongoing project with results still out on the horizon, but those are the kind of research things we do. Thirdly, we are a little bit involved in state level policy. We'll talk more about Public Act 233 and the citing legislation later, but we've been working in kind of trying to inform that process and informing the implementation process of this. Another cool resource I just want to shout out here is very recent, I think this is like a month old or less, are tax property briefs, really breaking down how in 8 states, it's kind of Great Lakes region plus a bit more, how property taxes work for utility scale wind and solar, and then providing calculators for each of these where you can punch in a township and the size of a project, and then it considers the millage and spits out what the township would receive, what the school board or the school district would receive. So these are really neat tools to get a sense for the economic benefit of any one project or an imaginary project. The last bullet, planning for prosperity. This is where the planner in me kicks in, is where recently we've been having conversations with the Michigan Office of Rural Prosperity over in Leo to think about planning more comprehensively, kind of beyond energy, with the focus on what does it mean for rural communities in Michigan, but also urban communities in Michigan to thrive. And how can a more comprehensive planning approach look like? What are other land use demands that townships and communities need to, or are facing? And how is energy one part of that? A lot of meta level stuff. But what I'm here today for really is to talk more about planning and zoning, which is the 4th bucket of work, and which is kind of what I spend my time in the most. And so I quickly want to go over just the Renewable Energy Academy program at large, and then 2 resources in particular that are kind of fresh off the press or are ongoing and are top of mind right now. And I hope some of these actually are helpful maybe in your work. And if there is, I would love kind of feedback on that too. So the Renewable Energy Academy is a program funded by the State Energy Office in Eagle to really provide a one-stop shop resource for planning and zoning information on large-scale renewable energy. Again, it's a mouthful, but it's providing support and resources for local officials, specifically on planning and zoning. And so with Eagle funding, which started way back in 2019, or the idea for this, it transformed into this program where we're offering training, webinars, workshops, bus tours. We connect communities with each other to share experiences on a peer-to-peer learning basis. We're creating different kinds of resources. And we also provide individual technical assistance. So it's really one-on-one, what are the questions a local government might have? And then really working to tailor, how can we help in kind of breaking down renewable energy and how local governments can plan and prepare for them in their interest, in their best interest. So it kind of all started back in 2019 when the Michigan State Energy Office, together with my colleague Sarah, who back then was at Close Up, which is the Urban Policy Center at the Ford School for Business, for Public Policy, I apologize, here at U of M. And so part of the Close Up program or center is their regular surveys of local officials. So back in 2019, Eagle basically bought out that survey and had an amazing response rate where we really try to understand what are energy specific goals local governments have across Michigan, what kind of resources they need to get there. And so we've repeated that survey in 2023, and that really just provides us with a basis of, okay, this is where people are. We can really use that to inform both our programming and also Eagle grant making. Another way of how we kind of just like assess the status quo, also going back to 2019, is the Michigan Zoning Database, where we captured all zoning ordinances in Michigan. First, we try to understand who even is zoning here, who are we preparing resources for, and then collecting zoning ordinances and reading whether or not they include language on solar and wind, both at the small scale and the utility scale. And we found that a lot of zoning ordinances back then, but still today too, are actually silent on renewable energy. And so while there are few bans, outright bans, silence is actually a pretty big problem in the zoning world as well, because that then does not set clear rules as to if a developer is interested in the project. And it's hindering development. And so from there, we now knew who is in charge of zoning, and realized that more proactive zoning needs to happen to put on paper what the rules in that community are and what the land use policy is in each town jurisdiction. We expanded that Michigan zoning database. If you want to check it out, the short link is energyzoning.org, with some Department of Energy funding to actually include now in total 6 Great Lakes states. And we actually started reading for setbacks and some of those kinds of things. If you're interested to learn more about that, you're welcome to ask me for links. So now that we knew what are the goals of local governments, who is in charge of zoning, we really since then have been offering kind of individual training for local officials. And sometimes that's an overview of battery energy storage 101. Sometimes that is very specific to new siting legislation, PA 233, and kind of what that means for that particular local government and how that aligns with their goals or not. And are there other people that we can loop in? We have done a couple of workshops now with the team at MSU-Extension, which is always fun to collaborate with. So that the training component is kind of an on-demand thing, but we also often leveraging the network through Michigan Association of Planning, just offer training kind of for anyone and everyone. In fact, we actually have one coming up September 3, where we dive more into zoning for solar. Another service, in a sense, that we can provide for local governments is the reviewing of zoning ordinances, where we really not try to prescribe, this is what we think you should put in a zoning ordinance, but rather what might be an unintended consequence of any particular language, or what message is this sending to developers, or how does that actually fit with your master plan goals? Are you contradicting yourself? So we're not prescribing this is the way to go, but rather just providing some feedback. Another fun thing, there's a question, I'm going to pause. When you talk about local governments and renewables, are the local governments owning assets as a developer might, or is it more on helping them get solar on their buildings or working as a municipal developer? Or that's a great question. Thank you. So when I think of zoning for large-scale renewable energy, then the usual scenario is that a local government, currently, it looks that way, that a third-party developer, a private energy developer, or a utility is approaching landowners and a local government with an interest of building a project on private property. There's also projects being suggested on public property, but when we're talking about these really large solar farm kind of projects, those are typically on private property, where either the energy developer is leasing land or purchasing land from the landowners to get enough property or enough land kind of under control to then build infrastructure that is owned by the developer. I hope that answers the questions. So the developer would be owning the assets. Sometimes those are getting then sold to, where there's one company that develops and then they sell it to another company to kind of do the operations part of things. So this is the context of those really big projects. There's another question. Yes, you're welcome. Okay, great. Another thing that we're offering for local officials and planning consultants sometimes too is renewable energy site tours, because I do believe that a picture speaks more than 1,000 words. Is that how the saying goes? I find it incredibly helpful for people to actually stand underneath the wind turbine, or maybe even peek into the turbine base, stand next to solar panels, hear how an inverter sounds, because that really demystifies renewable energy and provides an opportunity to ask a developer or the maintenance team questions on, how do you mow the lawn here? How often does the wind turbine need maintenance? And those kinds of questions. I really love kind of getting behind the fence, walking among panels, and really also comparing kind of how multiple solar projects in a day can differ. And they're all maybe utility scale, but the fence looks a little bit different, or the placement of the height of the panels looks different. So these are always really cool opportunities for folks to learn and to ask questions. We actually developed a little guide because we have been organizing these bus tours with the Michigan Association of Planning for a couple of years now. So if you want to organize your own, we got a guide for you. All right. I think one of the core things that we're working on are really corralling and creating resources. So next to training and events, the resources is really where it's at. And so when the Renewable Energy Academy program started, we looked around what is already there nationally that is relevant for Michigan communities, and then figuring out where are the gaps in creating Michigan-specific resources. And so all of this you can find on Equal's webpage, where we link to not just the database that I mentioned earlier, but solar and wind resources. But there's a lot more. We've developed case studies and FAQs on a variety of topics, and we've developed guidebooks. And I think that's what I want to spend a little bit of time on. Is some of you may be familiar with the Solar Guidebook that was originally created together with MSU-Extension in, I believe, 2021. It says 2021 on the slide, great. Which is really kind of a physical copy of a guidebook. I forgot to bring mine home tonight. With the first half of the guide kind of explaining Solar 101, explaining components, explaining why we have solar development in Michigan, land use consideration from a planning perspective. And then the second half of the guide really is template language for zoning ordinances with a fill in the blanks approach. So folks can kind of think about, we have some commentary throughout, so folks can really understand how to fill in these blanks and how things might apply, but at least it gives people a starting point and rather than a blank page to kind of start, how do their goals translate into local land use policy, aka zoning. And so we've created this guide in 2021. If you would like a copy, by the way, if you can email me your address, I'm happy to send you copies. And so because we just updated this guide, there's been a lot of legislative changes, but also generally lessons learned in 4 years. So we updated this guide recently and just mailed it out to more than 1,300, all of the planning commissions in Michigan, to provide copies of these. And then we'll have a webinar coming up with MSU-Extension and the Michigan Association of Planning to kind of talk in depth through the nitty-gritty of zoning for solar. Just a little shout out that we have a battery energy storage guide as well. Same logic, explaining it, and then providing sample zoning language. The question in the chat is it zoning ordinance advice for both commercial and residential solar development? That's a great question. Thank you. Yes. So the solar guide, and actually it's my next slide, you were foreshadowing what I was about to say, is that it really covers all scales of solar. So it explains different kinds of what planners would call accessory solar. So rooftop solar, building integrated solar, front yard, side yard, backyard kind of ground mounted solar for the home application, and then scaling it up to smaller utility scales like solar farms up to these really, really big projects. There's another question in the chat. Awesome, super. So it both explains all of the scales and provides zoning language for all of these scales. I'm a little bit biased towards the large projects just because that's kind of the hot topic, but we do, the guide covers all of those. Okay, we've got a lot of pictures in there. Again, the rooftop solar, ground mounted, and then to the really, really big ones. We talk people through components and bifacial panels and racking and tracking systems, and just show some pictures of some of the infrastructure that's associated with these projects. The guide is available digitally. If I can multitask, which I can't, I'm going to pop a link in the chat at the end, if that's fine. But it is. Or you can just Google UMich Solar Guide zoning, it should pop up. Okay. Some of the things, if you are familiar with the older version of the guide, there are a couple of changes that we've made that are not just based on new siting legislation, but also utilizing some of, or highlighting some of those policy changes with regards to the residential scale. We focus a little bit or kind of build a bridge with dual siting. So where solar is paired, for example, with a battery energy storage project. So also in the zoning section, we like have an opportunity to like insert language to align a solar ordinance with a BESS ordinance. Thank you, Corey, super. And dive a little bit into stormwater management, because stormwater runoff has been coming up as more of a thing we need to figure out how to best practice this. And then just as an example, also kind of dive a little bit deeper into ecovoltaics versus agrovoltaics and kind of the different kinds of services that or dual use approaches that we could pair solar with. Okay, John has a question in the chat. Michigan Homegrown Power is trying to deliver the guidebooks to all the townships in Michigan. Is this redundant because it's something you've already done? Yes, we mailed it to all planning commissions. So so townships with zoning authority or with the planning commission should have received them. If a township has is county zoned, which there are a couple of townships in Michigan, then they might not have received it, but their county would have. And so in that case, I would hope that the county kind of forwards that information. But if you hear of anyone who would like copies, just let me know. I'm happy to do this. But yes, we've just sent out more than 1,300 copies across the state. All right. All of this is not just explained in the guide, but also then translated into sample zoning language. I'm not going to bore you with that because not all of you might be zoning nerds like me. And so I'm just going to move on. But if you have any questions about this, this is the kind of stuff you'll find in the guide. All right, change of gears. One of the key changes that made us update this guidebook is citing legislation PA233. Guide from L and L is different. Yes, it's a different guide. Okay, PA233. I don't know how many folks in the room are familiar with PA233. But PA233 was one of the many bills in the energy bill package in 2023, where we have notably PA235, which sets a new higher renewable energy target and a clean energy target. And as the first Midwestern state, an energy storage target mandated in a very short time frame. And by 2029, we basically want to go from almost zero energy storage to 2,500 megawatts, which is an ambitious goal. There's also the increase of the rooftop solar cap in that bill as well. PA233 is the bill that I've been dealing with or working on for the last year and a half or so, and its companion bill PA234, which adjusts the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act accordingly. There were a bunch of other energy bills on energy efficiency, public engagement, just transition in there as well. But my daily bread and butter is really PA233, because as a planner, it now changes how local governments can plan and zone for renewable energy. Because now it creates an option for an energy developer to not get local zoning permit through the local government, but instead ask the Michigan Public Service Commission, the MPSC, to permit a grid-connected renewable energy project unless a local government has an ordinance that looks a particular way, that is a compatible renewable energy ordinance. And the law spells out what a compatible zoning ordinance would entail. This really only affects the really big projects. So a small solar farm or rooftop solar are still subject to local zoning, business as usual. But for these really large projects, for solar energy, it's 50 megawatts nameplate capacity. So we're talking 500 acres and plus, roundabout. Or energy storage has also that 50 megawatt capacity threshold. And any wind project bigger than 100 megawatts would be subject to this new law. And I want to make clear that it's not a mandate. So a developer who is trying to build a project does not have, that is bigger than these thresholds, doesn't have to go to the state. They can still work with the local government, even if the local government doesn't have a CREO, but it's just an option. It really is intended to be a backstop for situations where a developer and the local government can't get on the same terms. And so now it's a backstop option for a developer to choose. The second note I have here at the bottom of the slide is that I often get questions on, does this mean eminent domain? Are projects just going to plop down everywhere? Robert, did you have a question?
Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association.
No.
I don't think so. Okay. So the second note on here is that projects or building a large-scale renewable energy project always involves a voluntary landowner. There is no landowner is forced to accept or to sell or lease their land to a developer. So there's always the property right aspect of this, that a voluntary landowner has to sign up for this. To be very honest with you, it is not necessarily law. My colleague Sarah Mills and I would have written kind of there's ambiguities in the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, and there's more if you want to learn more. Sarah has published an op-ed and all sorts of things, but we try to be constructive, and as PA 233 really now is the new reality of the land, where we were involved in the implementation of the law. So as the law passed, and now the Michigan Public Service Commission staff is charged with receiving applications and processing them for the commission to decide on. There was a time period where the MPSC was having stakeholder engagement workshops where on a variety of topics where we try to kind of make the case for how planning and zoning typically works and what now this law means, and providing feedback to the MPSC. My colleague Sarah Mills, who's not only working at the Center for Empowering Communities, but is also a faculty at the Taubman School for Planning at U of M. She had a graduate student capstone project that was dedicated with the goal to support the MPSC with best practices and lessons learned, looking at other states where there's a state permitting authority. And so they published the report Power in Partnership, which should also be Googleable pretty easily if you want to read some more. We have, before I dive into the slide, what is this question? Is there a way to see for Michigan specifically the amount of commercial storage in the interconnection queue? Yes, it's a lovely map that I usually always show. It's I can share the link at the end, or you could Google and try MISO, M-I-S-O, Q map. And so there's a data version where you can download Excel sheets and look at projects in the queue, or you can check out the map. The report name, thank you, Harvey, is, let me go back, Power in Partnership. The interconnection queue, if you can't find the link, Corey, then I'm happy to pop the link into the chat later. I just can't multitask at the same time. Okay, there's one very long question. You found it, Corey, super. Okay, Charles writes, years ago, I served on the Wyandotte Planning Commission when the city considered installing a couple of wind turbines near the Detroit River. There were all kinds of hurdles that had to be addressed, such as doing a study of bird migration in that area to make sure that the proposed turbines would not be in the way of annual migration patterns. There were also some other considerations peculiar to the urban setting. What are the complications to consider when you have large-scale renewable project in urban as opposed to suburban? Ooh, that's a great question. So, in my extended slide deck that you are not getting today, I usually spend some time on talking about where solar and wind developers want to develop projects. So where are they looking to develop? And for wind, it is usually clear away from urban areas, not just due to the difficulty of finding available land to develop on, but also due to buildings basically being in the way of the wind. And this is not the sophisticated way of saying it, but so typically we see wind development kind of more in ag communities where there's just not buildings, I'm having difficulties finding the right words, but I think you get the idea of and so open areas for wind too, for better wind loads. So for solar, similarly, solar is having a rather large footprint when you think of megawatts per acre. So for solar, we're doing like around about, it's somewhere between 5 or 10 megawatts per acre, or 7. It depends a little bit on the project. So it's a much larger footprint, so you need a lot more cleared area to build projects. And so this is typically why we do see a lot of these in rural areas. For battery storage, we see a lot of battery storage proposals kind of all over the lower half of the mitten, but also in more suburban areas compared to wind or solar, just because of the footprint of these battery storage projects being so much smaller. It's often just one landowner, and 15 or so acres where you can build a utility scale battery storage project. So there's a lot more cities now that are actually turning our way and say, hey, what do you have on battery storage? So it's both urban and rural for those. Okay, let's keep marching on. We have developed a bunch of resources in the past year and a half, or since PA 233 kind of was passed, on this law, where we kind of explain how the law works, what the law means, what are the things that are still kind of unclear. So we have resources living on this website where we overview the law. We have a slide deck. We have some FAQs that we've just recently had another push to update those. It gets really into the nitty-gritty. We have recorded videos where we explain the law, different pathways, developing ordinances. So we have recorded versions of webinars online if you like to spend 3 hours watching videos. And we have developed checklists for local governments that are navigating either the state process, or they find themselves in the state process. And so what do you need to know? Where are steps for engagement? Where do you need to get your attorney involved? And so really having like a checklist that local governments can follow along. And then we have another one for the CREO process. So what it means, what are the timelines associated with this very narrow definition of an ordinance that the law describes. We do have more zoning resources. We looked at all of the zoning ordinances in the state that were the basis of projects being permitted. So in a sense, those were ordinances that led to successful projects. And we were reading those and compared those to the CREO standards in PA 233. So for example, we looked at what does the law say a setback between the road and the solar project need to be, and then looked at what do communities in Michigan that host projects, what are their setbacks, and compare that. So that workable ordinance data is accessible on there as well. And then we have the storage guide, the battery storage guide, the solar energy guide. They all incorporate these changes now, these legislative changes as well. And I also do want to shout out that the Michigan Public Service Commission has some great resources as well. They have FAQs as well. They have a flow chart of the process. So there are some additional resources if you want to learn more about kind of the nitty-gritty of the law. Okay. Let me see if I'm on the right slide. Yes, I have a double. I apologize. Okay. So the law, this comes up because I think this is a really important message. The law creates this concept of a compatible renewable energy ordinance, the CREO, what's in the green box. And it really lays out what a local ordinance now should look like. It's an ordinance that's constrained by PA 233. It's guardrails, so to speak. So it says an ordinance can't be having a more restrictive setback than X feet. It can't have a more restrictive sound standard than this. So we really break it into these 4 permitting pathways. So the law creates the CREO process and the Michigan Public Service Commission process, which is subject to those same zoning requirements, but then there are some additional documents and requirements that the commission can demand of developers, and criteria that they evaluate and all of that. So it's a little bit more of a beefed up version. And then there are all of the other ordinances that we have in Michigan that are not really CREO, because the definition of a CREO is really narrow, but they have led to projects, or they are leading to projects in Michigan. And so they are incompatible in quotation marks with the law. So that means that at any point, the developer could say, if you don't have a CREO, I can go to the state and get my project permitted that way. And so a workable ordinance, without getting too much into the weeds, is a local zoning ordinance that's a good old regular zoning ordinance that's stricter than the CREO, but inherently makes room for renewables. And then on the flip side, and this is a very blurry line in between, is what I call a unworkable ordinance or a restrictive ordinance that is from a developer's perspective, because they have the choice now, deemed too restrictive, and therefore the developer would probably take this project to the state. And even though this concept of a workable ordinance is kind of made up, it's not in the law, but it's a gray area and it's very legitimately possible. It really is because PA 233 is considered a backstop. It's not the first choice of a renewable energy developer, or for most developers that we talk to, because going through the state really takes more time. It takes more resources and more studies. The MPSC is asking for a lot more stuff to be part of the application than what the local government would usually ask for. And I think developers are also cognizant of the fact that taking a project to the state and going around local zoning is also unpopular. And so a CREO in that sense, kind of the top preference from a developer's point of view, because it's a very narrow, it's very clean-cut restrictions that the project has to stick to. It's cheap, it's quick. But the workable ordinance really is the next. And so describing this is really tricky. And so we've kind of come up with this idea of the CREO is the floor and the MPSC is the ceiling, and somewhere in between, local governments can beef up their zoning ordinances beyond what's in a CREO and still have the developer prefer to go through them rather than the state. How do we know what's workable? I mentioned it briefly. We pulled all of that data out and made it available. We keep updating this too for new projects that kind of come online. And if you want to kind of learn like how do different zoning ordinances look like and how does that compare to CREOs, I do want to acknowledge all of the projects that have yielded a renewable energy project. None of them looked like a CREO. All of them had more in there, more protective sound standards or additional screening requirements. And maybe this is the right time for me to also say that there is a pending lawsuit challenging what actually a CREO can entail or not. You ask 5 municipal attorneys and they will all have different opinions on what a CREO can be, because the law is a little bit ambiguous. And then, yeah, I'm not an attorney. I'm going to say that at this point, but just take that with a grain of salt. Another way where we try to kind of break this into and make this a little bit more accessible, because this is a lot, right, is to really tour the state and make this a workshop series. So my dear friend Ian O'Leary over at the State Energy Office at Eagle and I have kind of toured the different planning regions in Michigan and organized workshops with local officials. And we've had great turnout. We had lots of positive feedback, because I think one of the key elements of our workshop is to break this down into a game and to actually learn how does a setback differ between a CREO versus a workable ordinance, what would be unworkable. And so we've created this card game where we can flip through and think, okay, blue is the MPSC equivalent, green is what would be in a CREO, and really help people build their dream ordinance and then practice the sense of workability. This is one of the examples of, for example, how a solar sound standard differs, but that's a little bit too in the nitty gritty. And I want to leave some time for questions. I'm aware that we only have 15 minutes left. So what's next? We got a lot of money from the Department of Energy to work together better in the state. All of these logos are representing institutions, organizations in Michigan that have already been working together. So this is the Michigan Association of Planning. They're in the red logo, and Five Lakes Energy as well. It's kind of our industry partner. And we received $2 million from the Department of Energy to put our old work kind of on steroids and really work together better, and create more resources. And so what we have been working on is, okay, this is actually the next slide. So Five Lakes Energy, for example, is working on a tool to kind of quantify trade-offs between different zoning items. We are currently setting up a Clean Energy Information Bureau because sometimes I get lots of questions that I'm not the expert on. For example, what the impact on stormwater is, or how we best address fire safety risk associated with battery storage. And so we're currently recruiting experts on a variety of topics that can answer questions better and create fact sheets and FAQs better than I can. We're currently also working on a guide on explaining kind of the financial revenue streams associated with hosting renewable energy, so taxation, payment in lieu of taxes systems, state grants available to local governments, and then also how does a preparing for a project and updating your zoning ordinance and reviewing an application, those are resources and costs that the local government pays. So kind of developing strategies on how local governments can get these costs covered. So it's going to be a great resource once it's done by the end of the year. So RCEP really allows this kind of work. With that, I think I'm going to stop here, stop sharing, and I would really love your questions. And I'm going to just leave this on for 2 more seconds so you can copy my email address if you like. And I see that Dave has raised his hand. Go for it, Dave.
Yeah, I just wondered if there are certain communities that are dead set against what you're doing, or maybe there's communities that are following along like Ann Arbor is, as far as let's say gung ho to do this sort of stuff.
So I think there are communities across Michigan that are more and less excited about renewable energy. I think the communities that we talk to are unanimously excited to learn more and that to show up and educate themselves on how this law works, what it means to them, and kind of how to navigate this. And so this is a little bit of a non-answer, but I think there is a very large sense in realizing there has been a significant change in the law and translating very complicated and policy language into actionable steps. And with PA 233 kind of creating this backstop of if a developer can permit a project locally, they can have the backstop of taking it to the state. I think that really in the conversations that I've had with rural communities are really constructively thinking about, okay, what does that mean now? And what role can we have in a state siting process? What role for engagement is there? How can local concerns how can they make it into consideration of the Michigan Public Service Commission? And yeah, how can be projects that even go through the state permitting process be as much in the local interest as possible?
There's a question in the chat. Who decides what is workable or not?
Oh, I love that question. So the developer, ultimately, the developer has the choice unless the local government has a CREO, which again is currently contested in the front of courts. Unless they have a CREO, the developer can at any point go to the state for permitting. And so what is workable or not is entirely up to the developer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Madeleine, I think you mentioned that most of the ordinances being worked on now would be considered workable, right? But are there communities that have actually developed a CREO?
So there are lots of communities that are, so this law really leads to a lot of communities update their zoning, and communities have been adopting CREOs. Some community understand that they have to have a CREO, which I would rebut and say, no, you do not have to have a CREO, but you have to have a CREO if you want the developer to come to you first. And so I think there are communities that adopt CREOs. There are a lot of communities working with developers to create workable ordinances. And I think some of the looking at what has worked in the past before PA 233 is helpful, but also engaging with the developer and where are their pressure points? What do they maybe not like in a zoning ordinance? Or what items are deal breakers to the developers, and kind of negotiating a little bit, which from a planner standpoint, zoning ordinances usually are not negotiated. But in this case, this is what it kind of leads to. Okay, we've got Lee, and then there's also another one in the chat, but let's take Lee first.
Yeah, well, I think we have a few townships that they took the features of the Creo, put it in their ordinance, and then added one small thing
Mhm.
that the developer would almost certainly bite on. You know, it's a mild thing, but what they've done is they forced the developer to come to the township and talk about all the things that are unique in their township. And so I've gone to different townships and they in a very informed way say we're planning the workable route
Mhm.
because they want to have a discussion because that's one of the ways to get the developer to reveal all the places they have leases. You know, all these leases have non-disclosure attachments to them, so it's very hard to find out exactly where the lease is. And the best way to do it is to have a workable ordinance, drag the developer in, find out what he's got on his plate, and then work it out from there.
I think the main benefit really of a workable ordinance is to create a space for conversation. What are the top priorities of the local government? If they can't have the full laundry list of things that they would like to put in an ordinance because it may be deemed unworkable, it really forces communities to prioritize. And this is what this activity is for, is like, if you have to like kick things out of your zoning ordinance because maybe a developer would push back, what would it be? What would you be okay giving up on to still keep the process local? And so finding it's a dance, it's not a science, and it's different in every community we meet. There was another question, a follow-up question in the chat, which is who decided if a Creo, as the township thinks it's actually a Creo? I think, I think there are cases where a local government calls their ordinance a Creo and it's not a Creo. And I think ultimately this will be cases where the courts will decide. The Michigan Public Service Commission has made clear they are not in charge of judging whether an ordinance is Creo or not. That's really up for courts to decide. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if there's court cases popping up where the developer and the township disagree with each other on what the Creo constitutes. And the ongoing lawsuit, which is it more than 85 townships, or it's at least more than 70 local jurisdiction who have challenged kind of the interpretation of the MPC of a Creo besides other things. There's another big hot topic. Is the definition of a affected local unit of government, because that in PA 233 has a consequence of who receives funding to intervene in the state process, those kind of things. So there's what is a Creo? Who is actually the affected local unit of government? Is it the zoning authority or not? And then, so there's a couple of things where we just need to kind of see how it plays out, which for a local government is kind of frustrating because you need to make changes to their ordinance, or they are making changes to their ordinance now while things around them are still kind of up in the air. Yes, Lee.
I was in a meeting last night when the person got up and said, there's 70 counties have joined this lawsuit. And of course, he didn't realize that there's only 80 some counties, but 1,240 townships. So
It's a mix
there's
of
a
a couple
source of
counties and townships, yeah.
misinformation.
Mhm.
I want to compliment you on having a publication that talks about taxes, because that's the worst thing when somebody starts talking about taxes and the developer doesn't know what the taxes are in the state of Michigan.
Mhm.
It's very hard to communicate the surety that's there for the PILT system.
Yeah, and I think it hopes I am pulling out the link right now because now I can multitask. here's the tax work that we've published recently. And there's by the way, there's a webinar recording and slides attached at the very bottom too. Yeah, the idea is that it helps both local governments to get a sense for what is even realistic to expect because of millage. It breaks down how much does the county walk away with, how much do the different like taxing units each receive. And so in a lot of townships, that means they only receive a fraction of the property cost of the property taxes. And so ideally this is an informative tool for both townships, for just residents who are curious, or folks like you who just want to learn more, and for developers. Ideally, developers should know all of this already, but yeah, the link that I just shared explains kind of the policy, how it works, and the calculators, which are currently just for solar and wind. And so for large scale solar and wind. So battery storage is kind of the thing that's interesting, as the Department of Treasury is trying to figure out how do we best tax these battery storage systems. And that is kind of a to be answered in the future kind of topic. But for solar and wind, at least we have an idea. Are there other questions?
Yeah, we probably have time for one or two more questions if somebody
Well,
has.
then I'm going to interrupt again.
Go ahead.
Marilyn, you said the law includes batteries and we have almost no storage.
Mhm.
But the law that's what's specified in 233, if you figure it out, it's about 10,000 megawatts.
It's in PA 233. In
Yeah,
PA 235, it mandates 2,500 megawatts by 2029.
Is that kilowatts? Is that megawatts, or is that megawatt hours?
Megawatts?
Yeah, so that's the point. Times 4 hours is 10,000 megawatt hours.
True. Yes, I see your
And
math.
that's only half the size of the storage that we have in the pump storage facility in Ludington.
Mhm.
So when you said 0, I thought, oh,
Good
that's the
point.
wrong impression.
I
Okay.
appreciate you for clarifying this. We have the Ludington Pump Storage Facility. The P235 calls for an additional 2,500 megawatts of energy store. Actually, no, I need to double check that. I believe it calls for an additional, but I'm gonna fact check myself after.
It calls for 2,500 megawatts to last for 4 hours.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the 2,500 is on top of what we already have, or if it counts Ludington.
Well,
Because
Ludington's twice as big as what the bill concerns, so it can include,
and it's gotta be additional, right?
yes. Okay,
You
great
say-
job.
Is it specific to battery storage, or does it just say storage?
It says energy storage.
Okay, so it obviously most of that would be battery, but other storage options would be able to comply with that requirement.
Right, right.
Yeah,
But
okay.
What
Well,
I
it's
find interesting is just the timeline of how quickly those projects can actually be permitted and go to the MSU process and financing and tariffs. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now. So reaching a 2029 target, I think is going to be an ambitious goal, but we'll see how it goes.
it's 8 o'clock, so I think it's time for us to adjourn. But Madeleine, thank you very much, because this is a complicated topic these days, especially with the legislation and different options for communities. So I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of give us an overview and explain some of the resources, because it does look like there's a lot of resources that are available to local communities, which is really great, because they obviously could use the help. So thanks to everybody for attending. Madeleine, again, thanks for coming. And, we're going to have this recording on our YouTube channel. So I think it'll be a good resource for folks too, who want to get this sort of broad overview of what's required and what resources are available. So thanks, everybody. And I hope to see you next week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.